Hello and welcome to another episode of Droll Flit. This is a bit of a different video, and there's nothing really inspired by this. I've just been in a mood to continue to talk about this format of media, and this is all about slasher novels. Now, you might be like, what does this have to do with role-playing games? Well, there's a number of role-playing games that have to do with slashers. I don't have them in front of me, but believe me, they exist. Therefore, the most tenuous of tenuous connections. And also, this is just my channel. I'm just going to do whatever fun for me. And what I'm in the mood for is to talk about slashers. Now, slashers in novel format is an interesting cup of tea. You might not see books that are well known and well loved in here. And that's because, I'm a little bit of a hater when it comes to the slasher in novel format genre, in that it has to be real good. Because I feel like when you're translating the two, it's not a natural fit. Because a slasher is basically a super quick one and done story with a lot of graphic violence, and there's also a little bit of heart to there and some character writing that's supposed to be entertaining. Characters don't always make the smartest decisions, so you have this very uphill battle to climb in the novel format because you have to make a lot of these characters perceive real, and you also have to fill a lot more time with them. So you really do have a bit more of a challenge on hand. And there are some books that I think are just way too long and really don't work. And there's other books that I thought were just good. For the most part, I'm not including a lot of novelizations on here. Only one, and that's for a very specific reason, and we'll get to that as we go. So yeah, let's just start with the one that's going to be a little bit of the offhand, off the wall. I can't believe it's on here, but hey, this is my list. Fight me. Is Giallosaurus. Now, this is a Splattersaurus tie-in. You might be like, what the hell is Splattersaurus? Oh, it's a thing. A lot of people got together and they wrote a bunch of Splattersaurus novels. A bunch of novels about a dinosaur that splatters people. They're mostly good. Some of them are written by very canceled authors now, so skip those ones. And this one is technically a spin-off of those. I've only read the first two in the series before this. And it's funny because there's definitely a Splattersaurus continuity. There is a continuity tying a lot of these things together. I did not need to know the ins and outs of the Splattersaurus universe. You don't either. Giallo, you might be like, well, is Giallo a slasher film? Well, most people who know the history of slasher films know that a lot of it is inspired by the Gialli from Italy. And it's funny that it just has recently kind of come back into the book format because Giallo, the film, genre in Italy is named as such because of the pulpy paperbacks that were being reprinted at the time with the bright yellow covers. This is the only Giallo book on my list, which is funny because I have read the David Sodergren one that's way more, highly lauded and talked about than Giallosaurus, but I thought there was a little bit too mean-spirited and sleazy, and I didn't have the best time with it. It's a good book, but I don't know. I don't really feel like talking about it. It's not one of my favorites. He will get some references later on in the book. But Giallosaurus, what is this? Well, it's a Giallo where one of the characters is a dinosaur detective. And the Giallo part's really good, and it's actually pretty interesting, and this, weird... It's information about what it's like to be a dinosaur in this universe. I don't know. It worked. I don't know. It was compelling. I thought it was really, really good. It's just a really fun. This is super short, by the way, and I think that's one of the benefits of this. It's like a fun, whoa, there's dinosaurs here. Whoa, a dinosaur and a Giallo. Whoa, and it's just like a fun, I'm pretty sure I finished this with a bottle of whiskey, and I was like, yeah, I feel like a proper Giallo. Just. And I had a good time with it. So yeah, this is not a super serious book. Obviously, it's Giallosaurus, but I do think it's one of those ones that is well worth your time. Next up, one of the only novelizations on the list, and that is Silent Night, Deadly Night by Armando Nunez. This is one of the latest trend of novelizations from Beyond the Killer, Stop the Killer. They were Stop the Killer, then they became Beyond the Killer. Luckily, this is one of the few from that range that was reprinted by Titan Books, and they are coming out with a Black Christmas novelization by the same author and a sequel book to Silent Night, Deadly Night, but it's supposed to be a completely original sequel to the original book, which I think is cool. But anyways, a lot of those novelizations are harder to find. I was lucky enough to get this one, and also it's now been reprinted so anyone can find it. Thank goodness. This is a book that I think is important to mention on here because I feel like when you're writing a slasher novel, a lot of the core elements of writing a good slasher novel is found in the film Silent Night, Deadly Night. Now, this is a film that I think has probably the biggest literary impact on slasher in the novel format, so it was fun to see it in a novelization form. Like, for example, the Final Girl Support Group, which is not on here because I don't really consider it a slasher, but it's definitely about slasher movies. The main character in that Grady Hendrix book is supposed to be Linnea Quigley from Silent Night, Deadly Night. So I just think that is really kind of fun and interesting there. But to this book itself, this is the original film was a very transgressive film of its time. A lot of people protested it and were like, boo, you can't have a killer Santa Claus. This is hardly, it wasn't even the first film with a killer Santa Claus in the marketing even, but it made a big stink at the time and it became a rather infamous film. And you would think that, if you're going to novelize the film, that there are no steps left to take to make things a little bit more sleazy or controversial or shocking in the modern day because we have, so many years since the original film came out. Well, let me tell you, this book is well written, but also freaking disturbing. And whoa, it goes into some places where you're like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe you went there. Oh, it's so gross, and it's like compelling, and it manages to shock you, but in a way, because with a lot of extreme horror and even extreme slasher horror, I'm thinking about like Terrifier series, which I do not like the Terrifier films. I think they're garbage, and those are just like there to like disturb you, but they don't have any substance. Where I think that this one has a lot of transgressive elements to it, but it's still a very compelling, impactful read that feels like the grossness is there for a point, to make a point, to tell a story, and to tell it rather well. And yeah, it just, I really like the fact that there is a novelization of it, that it's so good, and that it takes such good advantage of the format, because I think that it's the way that a lot of literary slashers are presented, especially back in the day when they were starting out with them, which is giving the killer a little bit more nuance in life and flashbacks, and make them more of a character as opposed to just like the a character study versus just you put a bunch of people in an area and then go, oh, are they going to survive? Blah, blah. But there's plenty of that now, but that's not really the typical branch or avenue for slashers in literary formats. Next up, I told you David Sodergren was eventually going to make it, and this is Night Shoot. Night Shoot is, a pretty mean-spirited little horror film put into the book format. Reads super quick, it hits all the beats of a slasher film really well. Some gnarly kills, some really unlikable characters that you cannot wait to see meet their end. And I think that this film really benefits from having an awesome ending. So this is basically, the plot of this. I didn't go to the plot of like all of these books. I'm not going to go super in depth, but Night Shoot is basically like a bunch of people who are in an old-timey manor filming a horror movie, and it's like them meeting their ends as they're like going about and kind of like creating a horror film themselves. They find themselves trapped inside of one. Whoa! And I think that the main reason that this book is on the list is because of the ending. And obviously, I'm not going to spoil that for you. And what's nice is that it's an ending that I don't think can be spoiled for you because there's not a definitive answer to what happens. It's left a little bit open ended, and I think that this is one of those movies that kind of like helps you figure out what kind of a person you are because I felt myself wanting an optimistic ending for these characters, and I felt like I am going to live the rest of my life imagining that they're fine and that it all worked out. And I thought that was very funny because I sometimes could be a person with a more cynical mindset. So I thought that this one is a fascinating film in that I mean, I keep saying film, even though it's a novel, but because it feels so much like a movie. And that's like how Stonegren writes. It was such a good book that it made me optimistic. And that is, something to be held because that's not a thing. I'm usually a pessimistic bitch. Next up is Camp Slasher by Dan Padavana. Now, this is one that I never really heard anyone talk about. I had just found it at my local, used bookstore. Someone had brought this in for trade-in value, and I went to their horror section. I picked it out, and I read it, and I was really pleasantly surprised. This has a lot to it, and is a really fun, really kind of gross and gnarly slasher novel. It feels like the 80s slasher movie I never got to see. And it really does feel like it fits right in there with some of those old, grimier slasher films. And there's some really good examples of writing. And, obviously it's not the most creative name. And that's kind of why I thought this book was not going to be that good because, Camp Slasher is like a subgenre of the slasher film. You know what I mean? But I was pleasantly surprised in that, this is just a really fun, solid slasher novel that's obviously about a summer camp being slashed. But there's a little bit more to it, and it's got a little cool little details to it, and some gnarly kills, and was enough to impactfully, sear itself into my brain, which is especially impressive given that I read this one many, many years ago. So yeah, I really just thought that was fun. I'm going to be kind of going a little bit into graphic novels, not too much. There's only a few graphic novels on here, but I promise you there's a reason. It's funny because both of them have kind of similar aspects to them, but have a very different tone. So first off is Where Monsters Lie. So this is the first volume of this. And the idea is basically, what if a bunch of horror movie characters had a gated community? What do they do when they're not, like the log line is basically like, what do they do when they're not out there being in the movies? Like, what do they do in the downtime? And the idea is like that they have like this gated community of slasher villains. And basically what happens is the cops all are going to raid them this day. So you basically have all these cops show up, and then all hell breaks loose as all of these different serial killers are just going bonanza and doing all of these crazy things. It is so freaking funny, so creative, so colorful in some of the illustrations to them. It's just a great sit down read, laugh out loud time. And there's so many different types of serial killers represented here that will really kind of make you, as like a slasher fan, just be like, haha, I know what you're doing there. Oh, that's fun. I like this little angle you're taking. And yeah, I just thought it was really, really funny, and it was so much fun. And I discovered that there was actually a second volume of this. I didn't know there was another volume of this, because this one does feel very much like tied in as just like its own thing, and works completely as it goes. It's funny because if I was just going to talk about comics, I might bring up Maniac of New York, but because Maniac of New York is this really great slasher comic, but I haven't read it in like the graphic novel format. I've only read it in all the individual issues, but if you're at all interested, that one would kind of technically make this list. But Maniac of New York basically is like what would happen if Jason Takes Manhattan actually took mostly place in Manhattan and really blows it all into this graphic, wild slasher tale with the complete inspiration being like, hey, Jason takes Manhattan. Jason is only in New York for like 10 minutes. What if we made the entire book about if he was actually there? So, anyways, that's another horror comic that I would recommend, but I didn't have it in graphic novel, therefore, that's why it's there. Next up is the only 80s slasher film book on this list that was actually made in the 80s, and that's Joyride by Stephen Cryer. This book is thankfully going to be republished by Fathom Press coming up, and I cannot wait for other people to get a chance to read this because I thought this was a really, really fun, solid slasher novel. And this is where Silent Night, Deadly Night comes in because I really do feel like the way that this book is structured has a lot of Silent Night, Deadly Night in its exploration of the serial killer. But for the most part, this is just a really solid 80s slasher movie in novel format. And that is way rarer, especially during the time of the paperbacks from Hell boom, than you'd think. You would think that there would be tons of these. Now, there was a lot of novelizations and things like that, but there weren't a lot of straight slasher novels produced in the paperback from Hell range. And this one is just awesome. It's basically like a bunch of teens get together. They just graduated from high school, and they're having this big party at this place that's just a giant cemetery. Like, I love the setup of this book because it just sets up this, like, elaborate giant ass cemetery town, and it's like all these kids go there and then they get slashered. This book was really hard to find for the ages, so I'm really happy that it's getting republished because this book is really, really fun. And especially if you are in there just looking for like an awesome slasher movie in novel format, there's not much better you can do than just pure slasher goodness like Joyride. So this is one of those paperback from Hell that definitely stands the test of time, and you definitely should read. Although, it was written in the 80s, it's going to be a little bit dated, but if you're watching slasher movies, you should probably have that mindset. Next up, I swear, guys, you will see that there is something that is very familiar with a lot of my lists going forward, and that's the fact of I love slasher franchises, and I specifically love slasher sequels. And one of the big reasons why I like slasher sequels is the Scream 2 effect, because Scream 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time. I feel like when I die, I don't need a eulogy. Everyone just needs to get together in the church and watch Scream 2 and just go, you know what? That explains Andrew. That's fine. Put him in the ground. We've all watched Scream 2. We all understand it now. I love Scream 2. And I love slasher sequels, especially when they build on the final girl from the original original film, and kind of deal with what it's like to live with the trauma of being a survivor. And a lot of really interesting stuff can be kind of mined from that character-wise. Now, this sequel, Candy Cane Kills Again, The Second Slaying by Brian McCallie. Brian McCallie is my favorite modern slasher writer. I think Brian McCallie just writes great slasher books. The original Candy Cane Kills is great. Night of the Reaper, while not a strict slasher book, it's really about slashers, and I think it's really great. Breathe In, Bleed Out, which is his Joshua Tree slasher, which is really, really fun. I read that last year. And I just didn't want to just completely pile the list full of his books. But I think Brian McCallie is my favorite modern slasher writer right now. And Candy King Kills Again is just the perfect winter set horror novel that is so good. Because the original Candy Cane Kills is a good book. It's just, you gotta set up who Candy Cane is, why they killing, what's their backstory. Where Candy Cane Kills Again is just here is what it's like to deal with all of your Catholic guilt built in when you've left the Catholic Church. And this is just a book where basically you can feel like Brian McCallie is really working through post-Catholicism and in the slasher format. This book has so many great kills. Like, it's legitimately, most of this book is just one character showing up in this church of this hometown that, like, made her life a living hell and just taking vengeance on the entire congregation during their Christmas morning ceremony. And it's so freaking good. It's so good. There are some kills in here that you go like, oh my god, I can't believe they did that. Like, oh, I feel that in my soul. You're like, oh. And there's some really good writing in terms of, like, you know, in between the carnage. Like, this is a novella, so it's only about 114 pages, but you do still get some, like, really good character writing here. And, like, you know, actually dealing with, like, you know, trauma and things of that nature. But it's also just like the greatest time ever. And again, I guess you could, another thing that you could see, a recurring thing is I love winter set slasher novels. You know, there's two of them on this list, and there could have been more because, yeah, it's just a subgenre of slashing that I very much enjoy because I'm like, the best part about Christmas is knives and murder. I'm not a Christmas guy. I've never really liked Christmas. Next up, my second graphic novel on the list. This is Exquisite Corpses, Volume 1 by James Tynion IV. Now, James Tynion IV is like a masterclass horror comic writer. And this book, on its surface, does seem to have a lot of similarities with Where the Monsters Lie. But the tone is very different. Basically, the entire world is controlled by these families who have like this stock and basically control everything in this world. Is like, there's the Illuminati, quote unquote, exists, and it's all these families. And basically how they decide who gets to run the world every year is every 5 years. Every 5 years they have this game to determine who gets to run the world. And how they do that is they take one small town and they each one of the families get a different serial killer to be their representative, and they all get unleashed on a town, and the entire point is to see who will survive until the end. So this is basically like Hunger Games with slasher villains, and it's so freaking good. It's so good. It is so good. This first volume is, the first 3 issues. I think that they're going to be doing more of these, but the first 12 issues is almost wrapped up. The first, season is almost wrapped up, and it just keeps getting better and better every freaking time. I'm like, oh my god, I need to see what happens. I need to see what happens. It's so good. And there are so many, weird horror characters in this that it's just a hoot. It's a hoot. It's a hoot. I love Rascal Randy. He's this guy who was just in this bunny costume and just strangles children. That's a weird thing. That's a sentence I just said. He's a great character, okay? Rascal Randy forever. There's Pretty Boy, who is basically very much supposed to be, not Jeffrey. Ted Bundy. There's the Fosk Mask Killer, who's this Yakuza girl who's actually not evil, but she keeps winning these, so she keeps having to do this again and again and again. And there's all of these wild and super fun serial killer gimmicks, and it's just all of them in one book in this big slasher jamboree. And you get to see all of these characters who are just stuck in the middle of this slasher war, and they're just normal people who are what the fuck is happening? Our entire town is fucked. We can't get out. There's these armed guards who shoot you if you try to leave the town, and they basically start closing the cordon, and it just gets more and more leading to a big collision with everyone, and there's less and less place for people to hide. Oh my god, it's so freaking good. It's so freaking good. It's so freaking good. Next up is Don't Fear the Reaper, which is the second book in the Indian Lake trilogy, which is Stephen Graham Jones's magnum opus. Jade Daniels is a fantastic final girl. These are books that like I'm really impressed that I like because they're not small books. These are not short novels. They are pretty extensive, and it's kind of hard to maintain a slasher idea through a book that is that long. And I really do think that these benefit from really good audiobooks. I know Stephen Graham Jones's writing style is not for everyone. I really do enjoy his work, but I do think that audio is the way to go. He's like it feels like his work really translates well into the audio format. If you don't know, basically the Indian Lake trilogy is, about this woman who is named Jade Daniels, and she is obsessed with horror films, and she finds herself in a slasher movie, and it's basically like really, really interesting how this character grows and adapts and changes. And what's really nice about this is Stephen Graham Jones really kind of goes the gamut as to where he's pulling from for the slasher genre, because there are arguments here where it's like, is Jaws a slasher film? And like he has like all these like very fun twists to the format, and he's not afraid to go supernatural, but it's not always supernatural, which is also very fun. The idea is that there are supernatural things at play, but it's not always going to be supernatural. So like it could just be like a normal serial killer thing happening, and it's really, really fun. This book also has so much heart to it and is really telling a pretty impactful, great story. And there are some amazing set pieces in this novel, and a slasher book is really built on those set pieces. And oh my god, when the fucking serial killer is going through that like 80s pop-up VHS store and just killing all of these kids, you're like, oh my god, these teens are getting slashed left, right, and center. And it's like really, really fun, and there's some really awesome action. And yeah, just again, another one that's technically takes place in a snowstorm, another winter set one, not on Christmas though, so but winter's set. I'm there. I'm there. And I also just love the killer in this one. I think he's like really cool and really interesting, and they kind of like go into his history. And of course, Stephen Graham Jones is an Indigenous First Nation author, so a lot of that comes into play as to kind of like examining what it is like to be an Indigenous person in America, and that is a big part of what makes these books so good. So yeah, I love Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. And my number one is the one that I feel like I am the weird one here. I feel like a lot of people don't love this one as much as I do. But again, second book in a trilogy. This is Halloween Slaughter by Sergio Gomez, a sequel to Camp Slaughter. Now, Halloween is my favorite holiday. I love Halloween. It's so good. Halloween is the greatest thing of all time. I've not been able to enjoy my last few Halloween, so it'll be nice to have like just a Halloween to myself this year, especially now that I got my new home. Woo! But anyways, Halloween Slaughter is just a really, really hard-hitting slasher novel that has really, really, really good characters that you're rooting for, and you're really invested in what is going to happen to them, and it's not what you expect. Things that happen in this book were not what I expected by any means. Ignacio is like, who's like the killer in this. He is kind of very much like a Leatherface-esque character, who can be kind of normal, but then kind of like switches on the bond, and he has like all of these like inner world that is really compelling and interesting. But I just really, really, really love the main cast of characters. So this is like a pretty typical horror novel, and especially a slasher novel. Like a lot of it takes place at a Halloween party, but it was the writing that was so good in this, and like I was rooting for all these characters, and like it's an impactful ending. I don't even want to hint at where it goes, because I think that half the fun is not knowing. And there is a third book to this, and I love I really enjoyed Camp Slaughter. I really enjoyed The Final Slaughter, which is the third book, but I think that Halloween Slaughter is a masterpiece, and I really, really liked it. And it's one of those books that make me want to read anything that Sergio Gomez writes because I freaking loved this book. And I was so rooting for all the characters, and it's really, really great. I don't even want to talk about it anymore because I don't want to spoil anything for you if you have not read these books. So have you read any of these slashers? What is your favorite? Do you like slashers? Do you hate slashers? Let me know in the comments below. Toodaloo, goodbye.